uh, uh, one thing, but the all of the people that he holds close to him are hideous Islamophobes, and that's why he's the definition to me of limousine liberal. I said this before, but he is literally the definition. So one thing that I think about the liberal creed that I think is underappreciated is that it's anybody should have the equal access and equal rights to do anything, including those of different or no religion. And that has been forgotten completely in the discussion recently.
Love that you mentioned creed, because I always say that's the forgotten word
Yes.
in that particular article, like creed. Liberals seem to forget it quite often, and I hate to attack liberals or be critical, but it's just the truth. Conservatives do too, but liberals definitely seem to just omit creed. Anyway,
so
I'm sorry.
What does creed mean?
Religion.
What you believe.
Anyway, I didn't mean to stop the conversation with that. But I'm interested. Damien put up a note. Yeah. Now it's my turn. Damien put out an interesting story on the sidebar here, and I want him to talk about it, please.
Hold on.
I mean, that was just a sidebar. There's a lot of good stuff that you guys brought up. I mean, even.
Well, why don't you stop and start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the sidebar, that was when Sam was talking about Bill Maher.
Yeah.
And, again, comedy is a very difficult art. I talk about art, music, poetry, and comedy a lot, but comedy, when I've done comedy bits, someone is always mad. Someone is upset somewhere, somehow, some way. And when I know I did a good comedy bit, the opening, some people will laugh, some people will be mad. And then when I get to the punchline, all the people that were laughing are mad, and the people who are mad are laughing. Because there's a line in society and in culture that begs to be crossed so it can be examined. But you want to bend it, you don't exactly want to break it, because when you start breaking things, you get a lot of big issues dealing with eggshells and landmines, which Ish mentioned, brushing off the eggshells, and I'd love to touch on that poetically. But to speak to the sidebar, so Bill Maher, in a circumstance or situation, he ends up referring to field work in a derogatory term. And that's the thing about it, is the way you use a word, the way you use language, that exposes the way you think. Because language is a psychic experience. And when we're talking with each other, we're sharing our minds are meeting. And I put this little sidebar here because I had just read a while ago about this judge, and I included in some notes. And it was in Tennessee, and the judge in a court opening makes that statement where he says, "I'm going to work like a regular white man and not a slave." And everyone gets taken aback, and he doesn't quite understand it at first, and it's explained to him. He ends up apologizing. In fact, if you look that up on Google, you know how sometimes you get a bunch of different articles? You'll see a whole bunch of the same article because it was such a big deal. And it was the context in which he used that statement. He didn't even actually use any offensive word. It's that he used an offensive psychic experience, where he actually touched on this traumatic experience for what it is, differentiating the white man from the slave. And this kind of ties me into our subject that we start off with. And it's talking about the Jewish culture, and if they're to be considered white, or if they themselves consider themselves white. Or Mac Miller was your example, I think it was, you guys were talking about. I know we're like an hour away from that at this point. But a lot of this is very interesting, because I started some questionable protests in a class. It was called Class, Race, and Gender. And the class actually very closely looked into class, race, and gender distinctions. But I cracked the code on the first day of class, saying, there's one race, it's human, there's one gender, it's nature, and there's one class, it's productive. But I have to ask, how come religion is not included in class, race, and gender? And pointed out that class, race, and gender are constructs coming from political, religious, corporate sponsorship. And really, in a class, race, and gender course, we should be discussing political, religious, corporate sponsorships. But the problem with that is you would be arming us with the civil tools to defend the civil liberty that gets lost in the mess of class, race, and gendered programming. And this is something that I really like that Ish said, that he was in a moment with his friend and he had to brush the eggshells off. And I love that he identified eggshells because in some psychology that I've looked into, they talk about this thing called eggshells and landmines. And sometimes when you're with people, it's like you're walking around a bunch of eggshells and landmines. But there's a difference between these two things because eggshells are fragile, like the mind, it's a delicate, careful thing, and it breaks by accident, you know? But a landmine is a very carefully placed explosive that goes off on purpose. And oftentimes people set up triggers in their social environment to create a reason or an excuse to play the game. But the eggshells are just a byproduct of the beast rolling around a bit. I'm sorry, did I touch something?
Oh, you literally were. It's the reason why I said in some cases I'm wary of intent.
Yeah, the landmines.
No,
right.
Yeah, right.
Got to do a little mind sweeping there.
Right. Go on.
So, you know, I liked Cynthia brought up something before too that was self-awareness and self-consciousness. And when we look at this moment here, you think you might be the only example this person has, like Raul was saying. You might be the only person, so you have to be self-aware. But we might also be the last ones left who can make a difference, so we have to be self-conscious. So now self-awareness and self-consciousness kind of come together to help retrain your brain, where you think for the other person, I might be their only example, and then you think for the collective, I might be the only one left that can make a difference. And even if it's a little bit of a difference nonetheless. And that's a part of the retraining, fighting against social engineering methods that leave our family values neglected. And perhaps a family value that teaches this would be compassion. And you would say, talk to a family about compassion versus judgment, and how class, race, and gender are distinctions of judgment. And it's hard to express compassion while experiencing judgment. Whether you're being judged or passing judgment, either way, trying to exercise compassion becomes more and more difficult with the more and more judgmental distinctions you make.
Why I think grace is so important.
Yes, well, exactly, because grace is going to let you have the capacity for compassion. And then in a threatening situation, make a quick jump to judgment and make a threat assessment. Like, hey, are there landmines? Do I got to sweep for this? Is this dangerous? And that grace is what allows you to kind of exist between the two back and forth. But kind of what I'm saying is they can't both be on the same plate. They're two separate plates at the dinner table. And when you try to put them all on one plate, it breaks the plate. And then all of a sudden you're a monster because you weren't compassionate enough, or you got taken by a monster because you weren't exercising good judgment. So they're two separate plates on the same table, and to share grace, like grace at a table, right, you do need to have some kind of finesse there. But to kind of get to the main subject that started with Mac Miller and that Jewish versus white, I mean, we're bringing religion into a racial profile. And why is it that you can't profile someone who's Jewish? Is because it's not a racially distinct culture in that respect. And in fact, across many different racial distinctions, you can see Judaism is practiced to different extents. So it becomes a difficult thing, but skinheads.
Wait, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, when we're talking about Jewish folks, there actually is an interesting dual distinction. There's the Jewishness that's an ethnicity, and folks who practice Judaism, which is like another thing, right? Like there are plenty of Jews who are either agnostic or atheist or just don't practice. So that is like a little bit different, what you were talking about.
Okay, to question that further, is it like, so someone's Polish Jewish or Russian Jewish, but what would you say is Jewish then?
Well, I guess I wouldn't say it that way, but in other words, like in other words, like I used to practice, like I used to go to a Hebrew Israelite congregation, right? So some people would say that, you know, I was a practicing Jew, right? Like, but ethnicity wise, I didn't trace my roots back to like Ethiopians or folks who were like ethnically considered Jewish. So there's a dual distinction. It's like there's like one that's a heritage, and then there's other like people who like, you know, people who have you can
Is your finger on the
you,
button there, Flav?
you can no, I'm just not saying my words. You can convert to Judaism as a religion, but you can't like convert your ethnicity, right? So
Yeah,
like
I'm having a hard time wrapping my head completely around the ethnicity of it, but I can see what you're saying a little bit if I resort to some Hollywood distinctions. And if I look
I guess Semitic is a better term because it actually
Semitic.
Semitic like Semitic means like a mixed race people,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
So when we're talking about Semitic people, we're talking about people who trace their roots, you know, back to Judea, I guess, or you know, Israel or that region.
Yeah, Israel came
So
up in some research for this.
what's that?
Israel came up in some research that I did prior to this to
Okay.
try and get a good scope of some current events and things. But I was kind of leaving that at the end because there's some crazy stuff surrounding that. But I can see a little more clearly what you mean by an ethnicity through Semitic mixed multicultural expression that are of a Judaic origin, I guess you're saying, or Judaism.
Yeah,
But
people just confuse the two all the time. When we talk about Jewish folks, we're often not talking about we're not often talking about religion per se. We're usually talking about ethnicity. Right.
And the two, you know, are not mutually exclusive in this respect. They can exist kind of on top of each other on the same plate at the same dinner table. And that's why I say, like, that's an important thing where in school and college at Empire State College, I'm taking a class, race, and gender course, and they don't want to talk about religion. And they don't want to talk about political corporate sponsors. And I pointed out on day one in the class why they wouldn't. And immediately I started riots. And they were like, we got to be careful with this kid.
Well, is it possible that they only wanted to discuss 3 topics, which are already very comprehensive, as it were, and that you were adding a 4th topic, which could be a whole class in and of itself?
Right. But in many cases, how do you separate?
Yeah, they're in bed with each other.
Right.
And because the economics class that I was taking at the same time literally depicted that. And that's what I did was I brought these 2 classes together and I explained, I'm learning the same content, but from a different lens, but it's the same content. So every time the teacher would bring up a racial distinction, I'd be able to apply a religious distinction. And every time she would talk about class, I would bring up a corporate sponsorship distinction. And every time she brought up gender, I was able to bring up a political distinction.
It's interesting. I just want to touch on just what you said really quick because it's very interesting. When I was in school, I took a course called History of the Cosmos, Art History, and the History of Peoples, right? And all 3 of these courses on some level overlapped. They weren't like just these exclusive courses where you could bring points. And, you know, it just speaks to kind of what you're saying, like how you're kind of taking the same thing but through a different lens. And so I posed some interesting questions because, you know, I'm taking art history and the history of people, which on some level, right, when you take art history, you're studying the history of people. If you know, a lot of the oldest art are on some level not really art, right? It was just somebody's pot, or, you know, some inscriptions on a wall that, you know, I'm sure when they wrote them, they didn't think that they were going to be art, you know, some 900 years later, 1,000 years later, or what have you, you know what I mean? And some of it is very much religious, right? Which, you know, we're calling art, but, you know, in ancient Egypt, these were, you know, their practices, you know what I mean? So anyway, I'm sorry, go on.
No, yeah, that's a great compliment to exactly what we're talking about here. but to acknowledge the cultural aspects of the religious and the racial qualities in Judaism, we can see, I forget who mentioned it now. Someone mentioned skinheads and an incident with skinheads. And yeah, Raul, right, okay, nice. That, that rang to me for a second too, because, police officers with their interpretation of the law may have trouble distinguishing violent threats based on this. But a skinhead or a neo-Nazi, they know something we don't know, or they're able to really figure this out, and they beat up on, really, I want to say everybody to some respect, but they zero in on these traits that come up in culture. And any kind of cultural identification separate from them is obviously a big ordeal. And they zero in on that. And there's things that distinguish culture from religion, like in historical landmarks, but probably one of the, like, I find it amusing, but I don't know, I have a weird sense of comedy, but the idea of basketball is a really interesting moment as a historical landmark, because before Black people were allowed to play in professional basketball, Jewish people were considered the best at basketball. They were considered the best players because they were known for stealing the ball so well. And that was something you brought up, Sam, as like a thing that you deal with as a stereotype, is like Jews are stealing, or they're thieves, or they're always trying to skate away with something. And I mean, it happened right there on the basketball court. But then when Black people entered the sport, from coming from all over, not just from Africa, but anyone that had the genetics and were taller and bigger and, I guess in some cases you could say faster, they were able to outperform them. And that stereotype died a little bit in basketball, but was brought back up in other areas of life too. And in fact, something in class, race, and gender they discussed was occupations, and how certain occupations seem to have certain cultural backgrounds. Like the teacher brought up, police officers tend to be Irish or Italian, I think they said something. And then, and then that's when she was mentioning bankers and accountants end up being Jewish. And that's where I was like, hey, let me just throw the religious flag out here for a second. And but the fact that those demographics and statistics exist, very interesting. In fact, as a sidebar, if you want to look up why Jewish people weren't farmers, you're going to find out that it wasn't because
they weren't allowed.
Well, it's not that they couldn't own land. There's some weird things to look at, and that's kind of what I dove into a little bit about race and religion, is what is oppression and what is privilege? What does it look like? And something that's really big in oppressive privilege distinctions is land ownership. And the class structure has a glitch to it. But representatives in general will cater to people. Like in our modern day right now, representatives seem to be catering to people who make in a certain bracket, let's say $150,000 a year or $200,000 a year. Whatever their inflation raise went up to, that's what they cater to, that $200,000 a year bracket. But I don't make $200,000 a year. Does anyone in this chat make $200,000 a year?
No.
No, right? 100,000, right? That's tough. I mean, even on our greatest hustle with our greatest game and play, even off the books, it would be hard to do that. That's a bit of a challenge. Some people find more success than others, thriving, and most of us just barely surviving. But, there's something to talk about there as far as oppression goes in land ownership, because this is a big conflict when we talk about colonizing America. And America tells this story about oppression and all this. And when I looked up the history of how Jewish people may have been distinguished, because white people were the only ones allowed to own land in the beginning. This was a big deal. And even to declare yourself white, there was like a whole naturalization act in like 1740. There was even something in 1701, and you had to like apply for it, wait a certain amount of years to prove that you were a good character, and they would decide if you were of the good character. And in fact, people challenged that decision to define what white was, and I couldn't find the backing for it, but if I remember correctly, I believe, if I remember, it was that the judge ruled the white man decides what the white man is as far as good character was concerned. And that, to me, in the class, that I was like, whoa, that's a huge abuse in political protections right there. But what we should identify here is that Jewish people were able to apply and own land. 1649, you have a character, Franco, something, Solomon Franco, and he owns land, and he's a scholar between a merchant and a major general in the militia, and he helps trade items between the two. But then there was this dispute as to who should pay him. So like the merchant was like, no, the general should pay you. And then he went to the general, and general was like, no, the merchant should pay you. Like, it's in the service trade. Who pays shipping and handling? Typically the customer. But in this case, because there was a dispute, when brought to the courts, the judge was like, are you white? And he was actually, because he identified as Jewish, they were like, well, then you don't have a place here. And they awarded him like, they gave him some money, like some amount of shillings per week to like sustain himself until he could move back to Holland. He was originally from Holland. So like, what a weird moment right there, where like, at first things are looking good for Solomon Franco. And then all of a sudden in the court of law where they're like, well, what are you? And he's like, I'm Jewish from Holland. And like, oh, well, then I guess you're not white of good character. So how can we trust you between the general and the merchant, who are both white? We're going to have to just send you back as a scholar. So this was a weird moment where, like, in history, we had this moment where a Jewish person who could have identified as white, he could have lied to them and said, oh yeah, no, I'm from Europe. They wouldn't have been able to tell. But because he distinguished himself as such, he suffered the oppression. So an oppression truly did exist, but it was so hard to identify in the court of law, just like with the police officer who's trying to make assessments and then they decide based on some demographic statistics, there's a threat, when in most cases there really is not, especially closely examined. The protocol is ridiculous, but again, another topic. Something that stood out to me though as like, wow, like this was kind of intense. And I put a little note here for it. 1654, Jacob Barsimson, he left Holland and he purchased land in New Amsterdam, which is Lower Manhattan, which is what we know as Wall Street today. And this guy never lost the land. Nothing ever happened. In fact, in the New World Settlement, this was essentially taken from Portuguese Inquisitions. So the Portuguese Inquisition, a bunch of land went up for grabs. And this guy, who would be Jewish, was able to own this land and actually turn into a profitable resource that we still know today as a profitable resource. Very interesting difference between these two owners in the land. But my notes went on to Israel. This is where I run into a strange dead end, because when looking up the origins of what does it mean to be Jewish as a racial cultural identity, and what does it mean to be Jewish as a religion, it was very hard separating these two, let alone my 30 years of living. But now even searching through the internet, I had a hard time coming up with good information. And something about this stood out because in one hand, it's land that was created for them by the god, their god figure. There's a decree to it. There's a whole order to it. And then on the other hand, it was land given to them through the Balfour Declaration. And that was signed by the British government after U.S. involvement in a world war involving the Rothschilds. And I kind of hit a dead end there. Well, not really a dead end, more of like a rabbit-sized wormhole. And there's a lot of stuff that is speculative, a lot of speculation. And it kind of just left me with a little bit feeling like our culture, and as far as our cultural identities go, has been lost. And we have to ask ourselves, do we want to continue using these class, race, and gendered cultural identities, or are we ready to kind of evolve these things into a new form? And this is hard to say because I'm not thinking like, melting pot. We don't want to melt away these unique individual traits and all the beautiful art and music and poetry that has all evolved from these things. But we want to find a way to draw bridges and get rid of the landmines. We want to do a whole landmine. I mean, my opinion, I and some people I talk to, so I could say we, but it's that we want to do our best to eliminate the landmines and the triggers that set us all off against each other. So I really love being here and talking with you guys about these things, because it's given me some more perspective and insight. and a chance to kind of bounce some of this. I know this was kind of a loaded run through in history, but if you could throw me some insight a little bit on distinguishing this issue with some of the landmines surrounding the Jewish culture and how we can integrate this more closely.
A divisive tactic, right, is from an establishment perspective, is encouraging the promotion of what makes us different. Like, these are one of the ways to divide people. You spoke about the unique qualities of these, individual cultures, and those things should be embraced, right? But not at not at the risk of ignoring what makes us similar, right? Because there's another culture there. Another culture exists, one that is a compilation of all of the things that makes us similar, especially here in this country. You understand what I'm saying? And this is a culture that we tend to put on we just put it to the side. We don't explore it. We don't examine it. Sometimes it's looked at as negative when, one of the things that you said, in many cases, it's something that I've embraced, but in many cases, people are willing to reject it right out of hand when you say, well, there's one race, it's human. This is true, right? But then because we're encouraged as a systemic byproduct, we are encouraged to focus on what makes us different. It's one of my critiques as a liberal of the left, right? Like, we have so many different identity groups, right? We have so many different, I sometimes I call them pop-up cultures, right? Like pop-up groups, you know what I mean? Like, we have so many different groups, and each one has, I said this the other day, right? They have a proprietorship on equality. Like, their need as, a specific identity group to have, their piece of the equality pie usually supersedes the need of the next group, at least in their eyes. You know what I mean? And I think that this is systemic. It's an establishment thing where this is like Art of War, right? Like, the few, in order for the few to control the many, there can't be this positive groupthink, right? Like, there can't be this overarching positive groupthink, because groupthink can be considered negative, right? We don't have a hive mind. But something I said the other day, if our focus was on, at least from the left side, things like, just the main theme was just equality, and we forget about individual or marginalized distinct groups and we just look at it as, this is an equality issue, we're all together on this. You see what I'm saying? This is an equality issue, we're all together on this. I'm not distinguishing that you're LGBTQ or you're Black or you're Latinx. I'm identifying a problem that you're dealing with, and here we are with you. You understand what I'm saying? And from a positive perspective, I just want to say something, and I want to be done. I want to let other people talk. You said something, right, about how it's catered to, people with money. And I had an interesting experience 2 years ago. I was going to buy a Jeep Rubicon, and I didn't buy it because I was very much disgusted by the way that when I walked into the Jeep dealership, so in my household, I'm not going to really give it up, but we probably bring in, before we pay off or pay towards our debt, at least $100K, right? So I walked into a Jeep dealership with the intention of, anytime I go to buy a car, my intention is to leave with the car. Every single time I have to jump through hoops because of how the color, me and my wife are Black. That's just pretty much what it is. You know what I mean? So it really, so this particular time, I decided it's 2018. I wanted a 2018 Jeep Rubicon, and I wanted it with everything. So this isn't a car that you could just go get off the floor. It has to be built from the ground up. So I call this guy, on a Friday. I make an appointment to see him on a Monday. I get there on a Monday. I walk in the door, and he says to me, and my wife was pissed. He says, to really make the payments on something like this, you need to be making like $100,000 a year at least. right? This is what the guy who is trying to sell me a car, who's supposed to be trying to get a commission off selling me a car, says to me, right? And my wife immediately, like, she was done deal. Like, we go through the motions, but it's not going to happen because of the way that and so he then says to me, well, would you like to look at like a Sahara or, you know what I mean, a Wrangler? Because they had those on the floor, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, we talked Friday. And he's like, yeah. And I said, I kind of told you what I wanted. I wanted Jeep Rubicon, period. So he's like, well, it's got to be built from the ground up. I'm like, okay. So we sit down and, we go through the motions, right? And so it was, everything that I wanted was going to be $52K total, right? This is what it was going to be. And, I looked at my wife, we were already pissed. Like, it wasn't going to happen only because of the way that this guy talked to us, period. That's the only reason why it wasn't going to happen. I even considered, do I want to pay, my mortgage payment for, a little more than my mortgage payment a month for a vehicle, the whole nine. Mind you, like, when I'm ready to walk in to get a car, I'm coming in with a significant amount of money. I'm not gonna say how much, but a significant amount of money, because I don't want to, like, I want to pay down. I want to already put a substantial chunk into what I'm going to be paying on the car. So it's usually a significant, like, when I bought my Charger, I had $10,000 in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, it's not, because I'm not a car dude. I'll drive the car to the life of the car. You know what I'm saying? So by the time I'm ready to get another car, it's because I already have a substantial amount of money to make the first payment. So and the first thing this guy said was, well, this is the type of car you need at least $100,000 a year income. And it was literally because he looked at me and my wife.
Jesus.
No car dealer who gets a commission for selling a car looks at somebody and that's the first thing that they say.
Yeah, that's a sure way to lose a sale.
Yeah.
That the sale, you lost it. I said, you know what? I looked at my wife. I said, you know what? I don't even want this anymore. And I told her privately, I said, what I'll do is, I said, I'll take this same money. We'll just trade our car in and we'll buy the same car next year. It'll be a year old and we'll pay like $25K for it, because it'll be $35K, but I'll put 10 down and trade, you know what I mean? Trade my car in. And that's exactly what our plan was. And that's what the plan is. I'm like, you know what? Say again?
But they revealed that whole situation there where class is a bit of a glitch to this whole system. And when they start making judgmental distinctions, they reveal like what this corporate sponsorship is catering towards. And
in this case, it was race. It was race though, right? It wasn't.
Yeah.
Well, they looked at my race and assumed that I wasn't making the type of money to afford.
Yes.
Which
So
is weird because you went in there to purchase it. How could you?
Like, I called him. I had done research on it. I called him the Friday before. I already knew, okay, this is what I'm going to have to pay for this car. Like, I knew when I went in there. I'm like, okay, well, don't get me wrong. That would have definitely put stress on what we have to spend monthly in our bills, for sure. But it was something that we can swing. Like, listen, I'm in a position, my daughter is grown, I raised one kid, it's just me. My daughter works, you understand what I'm saying, my wife works, I work, you know what I mean? It would have put a little stress on us, but not something that we could not handle. You understand what I'm saying? Like, it definitely would have been something we could handle, for sure.
Something to speak to the game a little bit there. In the hustle, we would know to hide our resources, not let somebody know we have $10,000 in our pocket. But that's because they'll treat you differently. They'll do different things. So like Clay was saying, is that he made a racial distinction that screwed the corporate sponsorship, because you were about to sponsor him with a great commission, but he revealed himself not able to have the capacity for that kind of generosity that you might have shared with him.
Listen, I'll do that story one better, right? So some years ago, in the early 2000s, I had an Impala and I crashed it, totaled it.
Oh.
And I was at the time I was like, I wanted a Charger anyway. I'm just gonna go buy a Charger. it was, the Charger had come out in like 2006, 2007. I love that body. I'm like, I'm going to go buy a Charger, top of the line, right? So I bought a Charger, had the Charger for a while. Something happened, and I ended up not having the Charger. So we ended up with like I don't remember what we had, like an Altima, right? So we had this Altima, and we bought our daughter the same car. Mind you, if you have a child, if you never buy your daughter a car, buy them an SUV. Buy them an SUV. Especially if it's their first vehicle, buy an SUV. A lot more protection if they get into an accident. So at any rate, my daughter totals her Altima. So we buy her an SUV from a dealer, right? And so we buy an SUV. We have an SUV. My wife and I are driving on the expressway one day. We get into an accident. We almost die.
Oh my God.
Yeah, car total, right? So we go into the same dealership that we had just bought my daughter a car from. The guy walks up to us and he goes, "Have you been here before?" We're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Who did you deal with?" And we told him, and he's like, "Well, he's not here today. Do you mind if I take care of it?" So I don't care about cars. Every few years, I get on this trip where I want this kind of car, right? When I lost my Charger, I left it in my wife's hands. I'm like, whatever car you want, that's what we'll get. Because if it's not a Charger, I don't want anything else. Until a couple years ago when I wanted a Jeep. So we go into this dealership, and there's this Charger that one of the dealers bought from an auction 6 months prior, right? And gorgeous, go Beats by Dre, fully loaded, Hemi on top, and I don't even want to look at it. And my wife is like, "Well, Ish, let's look at the Charger," because she works like a high-end job. She very high-end, so presentation means a lot. You know what I'm saying? She had gotten used to driving a Charger. Presentation just meant a lot to her. So I'm like, okay. So we drive this Charger. It was really cool. So the guy's talking to me and I don't tell him like I owned a Charger. I know, tell him anything, right? So he's talking to me and he's like, "Yeah, that Charger is really cool." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't like the price." It was only 24K. It was, it was a used Charger. It probably had 12,000, 13,000 miles on it. It's 24K, right? And I'm like, "I don't like the price." And he goes, "Oh no, that price is perfect." I'm like, I don't want to pay anything more than 20,000. Period. Like I just bought a car from you. We need a car. We're going to buy a car. Like you have a sale, right? I know that he paid. I saw the paperwork on it. I know he paid like $9,000 from the auction 6 months prior, and it was still sitting on the lot. So I'm like, I don't want to pay anything more than 20K total. Period. Total, as in total. I don't care how you figure it out, but you can figure it out, and we'll pay 20K. And mind you, I got 10K in my pocket, and we need a car. So when he says that, he's like, "Well," and he's the one who bought the car from the auction, so he wanted to pay 12K. He wanted to make 12K, right? I could tell. And so he says, "Well," and he looks at my wife, because once he said, "That price is right," I'm like, "Well, if you can't come down to 20K, then I'm good on it." And he looks at my wife and he goes, "Well, we got this nice Ford Focus." Right? So think about this. We're looking at a Charger, and he says Ford Focus, right?
Oh my God.
That was it. Like Belinda, she's no nonsense. As soon as he said Ford Focus and started to like show her all of the features of this Ford Focus versus a Charger with dual exhaust and a Hemi on top, and Beats by Dre, and the whole nine, right? She's not even looking at the screen anymore. And he goes, "Somehow I feel like there's nothing that I can show her that's gonna satisfy her. Like it was on her."
Huh.
Listen, I remember looking at this guy because I felt some type of way. Like, what are we doing here? Hold on. We just bought a car from you, right? Our credit it shines. You understand what I'm saying? If you talk to anyone in that establishment, that you could come to the conclusion that we have a substantial amount of money in our pocket right now, right? So he says, "I don't know if I'll be able to help you today." And I looked at him. It was a Friday, and I said, "Dude," I said, "You're gonna call me. You're gonna call me this weekend, and you're going to offer to sell me the Charger for what I want." "No, can't be done. We're not going to be able to do it." "Okay." Saturday at 4:00, a supervisor
Nice.
called me up and wanted to know why they didn't get our business.
Mm-hmm.
Because why would you not get our business? We just bought a car from you, like literally weeks before. So I explained exactly. I said, we wanted this Charger. She was like, which one? I'm like, 20K. She's like, I'll call you back. She called me back. She was like, yeah, we can do it for 20K total. No problem. I'm like, you know what? We're good. Thank you. What happened was we left that dealership and walked across the street to another dealership and just bought an SUV and called it a day.
Wow.
But that was another example of, you know what I mean? Like, like
that says it. I mean, that's a great example of this.
If I was a supervisor there, I would have been pissed at the person that you dealt with.
Right?
I would have been fucking pissed.
Right? Like, you just don't they call those whales? Like, these people just bought a car from us. Like, what are we doing here?
I was just about to accidentally call you a fish, but it's a whale.
A fish, a whale, whatever. Like, we're fish.
No, it's a whale. It's a whale. Yeah.
Like,
well,
you just
sorry.
Well, no, go on, please.
Well, it's really interesting because I actually, not that happened to me personally, but I actually have a very similar story to that whole like car dealership mumbo jumbo that we just discussed. So, I mean, for those of you that aren't aware, I'm married to a half Latinx, half white gentleman. And so basically, like, my father-in-law was white and my mother-in-law immigrated from Chile. So, English is her second language. She still has the accent, what have you. Like, you can visually and auditorily tell that she is an immigrant from a Latinx country. So this was like Misha's senior year of high school, end of junior year, when they started talking about him applying to colleges. So, and they called the parents in, like the guidance counselors to say like, well, what are your kids going to be doing after they graduate? Like, let's start to make life plans. And that day, I don't know, there was an issue in traffic or something, but Misha's mom got there before Misha's dad did. And they started the meeting with the guidance counselor. So there's the guidance counselor saying, and mind you, this is in California, and the guidance counselor is saying like, well, when it's just Misha's mom who has the very clear accent, the guidance counselor starts saying like, well, UC Davis would be great. Maybe you could try like UC San Diego, or, how about San Jose State? And Misha was at the top of his class, like grade-wise. And then, Misha's dad arrived in the appointment, and, he was like, very soft-spoken, like polite, gentlemanly white guy who was a professor at Stanford. And so Misha's dad comes in, he says, oh, geez, I'm terribly sorry. Gee whiz, I'm so sorry I'm late. My faculty meeting at Stanford ran over. I said that I had an appointment to go to in traffic, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as he said my faculty meeting at Stanford ran over, the guidance counselor starts talking about like, oh, well, Misha's grades are very good. I think he could apply to a Harvard or a Princeton. But like when it was just Misha's mom in the room, the guidance counselor assumed, like before his dad came into the picture, the guidance counselor was suggesting state schools because they assumed that like they were an immigrant, like that it was an immigrant family that didn't make that much money and that they wouldn't be able to afford Harvard or Princeton or whatever.
Wow.
So
But if he's on top of his class, why wouldn't they try to suggest scholarships that he can apply to if he's like the top of his class, instead of just assuming you can't afford it and you won't be good enough to get scholarships to go to those schools? What is the thinking?
I
not
agree with
food chain.
you. Like, I don't know why they didn't do that, but anyway, go ahead.
That's horrible.
That's
Yeah,
typical.
it's
That's very
awful.
typical. It's an
Yeah,
it's
immigrant
pretty
story,
typical.
completely.
Yeah.
Especially for a guidance counselor to say something like that.
Oh, guidance counselors. Let me tell you.
They're the devil's handmaids.
Uh-oh,
Let me tell you that right now.
Mike's in that hospital, that anti-hospital voice.
Well, if my job was as useless as a guidance counselor, I'd be examining all the eggs in the quick stop too, you know?
Now I just remember some problematic guidance counselors from back in the day. Is all.
They were that bad that they still have an impression on you?
Well, I mean,
Leave it to Cynthia to stoke the flame.
I mean,
No, but
one of them in college, like I was, I just wasn't doing as well as I should have in college. And this white woman, she wasn't connecting with me at all. She just wasn't, I don't know, she just wasn't like real. And she tried to like pull the, something about your ancestors like did a
Oh my
lot
God.
to try to.
Oh, no, no.
Yeah, she said some like said some bullshit like like,
Everybody, we're getting unique Flavius Maximus voice. We only get this. It's rare that we get this Flavius. Go in, Flav.
Yeah, I mean, there's not enough to the story to go in, but needless to say, this was not the kind of person that I, went out of my way to speak to. But it was just typical of.
She brought up
it was
the
just
ancestors.
Damn.
Yeah.
Brought up the ancestors on you, bro.
Yeah.
Oh.
But this was a person who was like, this was a person who was not inspiring otherwise. Like it wasn't like she was one of these white teachers in the black school movies who, inspires the kids. And then
She wasn't Michelle
I
Pfeiffer.
resemble that remark.
I was gonna say Michelle Pfeiffer too.
Yeah.
Yo, it's like when the white guidance counselor says to the black kid that's not doing so well, what your people went through.
Exactly.
Like, do
That
you
was-
understand?
That was exactly her tone. That was exactly
Oh
her
my God.
tone. Exactly her tone. Yeah.
Do you know your plight in America? Do you know what
Do you know that you're oppressed?
Wow.
Wait, what school was this?
Canisius.
Huh?
Oh, it was here in Buffalo.
Canisius.
That's a religious institution.
Yeah, they have their issues.
Y'all got to take like religion courses, right? Like mandatory.
Yeah, but you know what I took as my religion course? A dreams analysis class.
Dreams analysis?
Yeah,
Oh my God, that's a course.
it was a
They
cool
let that
course.
go down at Catholic school.
You know what our
Dreams are
homework?
religion.
Our homework was recording our dreams.
Nice.
Oh, that's a cool class.
How?
That's
How do you
awesome.
record your dreams?
Writing
you-
down what
you
you
write
dreamt
pen and
about in
paper.
the morning?
Yeah,
Probably
yeah.
also with Michelle Pfeiffer.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
Keep
that's the
spending
thing.
most our
Listen.
lives.
What's that?
Living in a
gangster's
gangster's paradise.
Told you we break out in the karaoke.
Yeah.
You know
What's his dream?
the version I remember of that more than Gangster's Paradise was Amish Paradise. That tells you
Oh,
what
yeah.
a huge nerd I am.
Oh, weirdo.
I did that in a lip sync contest at summer camp, and I won second place.
Oh, nice. There's a horrible version of that. Well, I haven't seen it, but I saw the preview, and I was warned that I probably shouldn't watch it, which almost made me want to watch it. But I think there's a Hillary Swank movie.
Yes,
she pulls
Freedom
that?
Writers. Freedom Writers.
Freedom
Oh,
Riders.
man, that looked pretty rough by the previews. She starts white-splaining Tupac to the kids, and then they like show her that of course they know who Tupac is, and then they make her feel stupid.
Man.
A movie for the holidays for sure.
It's like that meme that meme that went around with about 6ix9ine, where there's like three upper middle class kids sitting around their living room, and it's like, dude, he broke street code. Like they're like literally going in about how 6ix9ine broke street code, and there's like they're like three upper middle class white kids sitting in like a lavish living room.
That's funny.
Canceling 6ix9ine.
That's really funny. Street code.
And now I really thought we could get through a show without mentioning that.
I was about to say.
I had to bring it up. I had to go there.
But you know what? At least we have other segments, so this is only one segment. So it's
I
technically.
can't believe we didn't
another
get the
show.
hot or not.
Well, why not? Why not?
Do we have any
just
time
did.
left?
One.
Because it's been 5 hours of politics, baby.
Yeah.
I have a driving class tomorrow. So.
Why
What's
don't we
on
do
your
a quick version?
mind, Cynthia?
Why don't we do a 60-second version?
Well,
No, we got to give this as much
Fair.
time as
we
we.
had a really long time
Yeah.
with the women.
Yeah, we got to give it as much
Yeah,
time
but
as
you
we.
know,
had a
but-
you had a
but you-
question, I thought.
But both of us enjoy the hot or not with women. Not all of us are gonna enjoy the hot or
Yeah,
not.
well, I will. So, and
So will
Sam,
I.
thank you.
I don't particularly enjoy it, but I'm game to participate for the sake of that. Other people who were on our show were game to participate. I'm certainly game to participate.
Equality. Equal
Yeah.
opportunity. Equal
Well-
opportunity eye candy.
Thank you. Exactly.
And double the chance to participate for me.
So, what was on your mind this week, Cynthia, that had you aggravated?
I don't know if I can go into it now. It's almost 1. No, it was about the military and stupid people.
Uh-oh. What
That'll be,
happened?
we'll leave it
Well,
on a. We'll do
yeah.
a cliffhanger. That'll be the
Pregnant
cliffhanger
pause.
for the next show, because it is about the top of the hour for this one.
I know you'd have a lot of insight about, I would assume you would, about the military. And the
And
way
about
they
stupid people.
operate, their mission, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a 30-second conversation to me.
Okay.
So
Okay.
hot,
Well,
or
at your leisure or convenience, we definitely can get into it.
hot or not next week, military next week. That's
Hot or
all.
not in the military? No.
I was thinking.
You know what? There's actually a TikTok of this person. It was like a military-related TikTok. I have to find it. I might have saved it because it was so good. I'm going to show it to you.
Make sure you take screenshots when TikTok's gone in 45
Yeah,
days.
basically.
What? Wait, it's actually going to be banned? I
Yeah.
thought that was not going to happen.
Unless Microsoft buys it.
They might buy it because they definitely need new property.
Cynthia, I'd like to ask you a personal question, and if it's offensive, absolutely chastise me.
I'll probably be offended. What's up?
Okay. Okay. What is your ethnicity?
Yeah, I'm offended.
Okay. I'm asking for a specific reason because of, and I'm not trying to stereotype, but because of the reason why they banned TikTok, which is what led me to question.
Yes, I know what you're. I have a feeling I know where you're going with this.
Because they're stealing information.
I don't know who
No.
they would be.
Sorry, I'm trying to look for this. I don't know if I saved it.
I'll tell you my ethnicity.
I don't ask people their ethnicity because it's not important.
It's not, but I'm just curious is all. That's all. I was just curious.
At least you asked what's your ethnicity as opposed to where are you from. No,
Oh,
where
I
are
Right.
you
hate where are you from?
Oh yeah, I was trying to be very respectful. I don't think it's important either way. I was just personally curious is all. And again, based upon, why they say they were banning TikTok is all. But just for everyone's information, I am Pakistani.
Are you really?
No.
He got you on that one. Remember the story about the eggshells and the dynamite under the roof or whatever? I mean, no, the landmines.
Landmines. Yeah.
That's what it is. You boosh. Oh, ish.
Such a good one too. You have to see it. You know what? I hyped it up so much.
Oh, and by the way, for everybody, I'm 100% Italian.
Are you really?
No.
No, she
Well,
talks
I'm-
about being Irish all the time, actually.
I'm South African.
Say again.
What?
She's South African.
Yeah, Cynthia said she's South African.
Okay. My homegirl is South African.
There you go.
The actor,
Charlize.
Charlize Theron.
Theron.
It's Charlize.
Yeah, Charlize
Charlize
Theron.
Theron. Wow.
She's beautiful.
Exactly.
She is certainly beautiful now.
Yeah, she is
She was
beautiful.
always beautiful-ish.
I just didn't like young Charlize.
Ish
had
does
this
not
conversation.
Ish
You
does
like
not
you like old
young
guard,
women.
sure.
Oh yeah,
Ish
old
will
guard
not-
Charlize.
Prefers
Ish
mature women.
Ish will never be accused of being a Leonardo DiCaprio / Jack Nicholson misogynist. He only likes like women when they reach a certain age.
Speaking of
Women
which, there's
age
a
like
good
fine
show.
wine.
There's a good show I started watching about that. Takes place with some English chaps. I recommend it.
Peaky Blinders.
No, it's a new show. It's a new show I just started watching.
Gotcha.
What
Let's
is
see
it
if I
called?
can.
I
Well,
don't
let's
think
see
my
if I can-
appreciation of women makes me a misogynist. I think it makes me a misandrist.
Oh, you hate men.
No, but I think if
Yes.
we're gonna say that because I appreciate women, we're gonna attach misogyny there.
I
Then I
didn't
think
say
it's-
that.
You said Ish is not a Jack Nicholson, Leonardo DiCaprio misogynist.
Right. I said you would never be. Yes. No. I didn't. No,
Okay.
Okay.
It's what you were leaving out, Sam, that he's sort of
right.
poking at.
Well, why don't you ask me instead of like presuppose? But I guess that takes the fun out of it.
Right. I couldn't make what I think is a funny.
Exactly. No, I hear you. I get it. I get it.
Sam, you should have also said that you're from South Africa. That would have been funny as hell.
Right. That would have been really good. No, I know. I left my blonde hair dye at home. Like, well, no, I am home. No, that would have
You
been
can't
cool.
use that excuse anymore.
Wait, so does
No, I want to
Charlize
be
Theron?
Brazilian. I want to
Does
be
Charlize-
Brazilian. They're hot.
Does Charlize Theron live in America?
Yes.
Yes.
So could she be called an African American?
Ah.
You know.
Yes.
Yo, imagine if she came out and was like, "Yeah, I'm African American."
That would be hilarious.
You know, that's the one thing that I hate about white people when they're trying to like describe
one?
people.
Oh, just one, Cynthia.
Just one thing.
Just one. You can
Is your,
narrow it
is your
down.
finger on the button, Flav? Is your finger on the button?
One thing. One of millions of things.
Go on.
It's like they're so scared to describe someone as black. They're like, oh, African American. I'm like, what if they're not from Africa?
You know why?
Like-
You know why that is, Cynthia? Because then you have people who say stuff like the blacks. You know, they don't want to sound like
No.
they don't want to sound like that.
No,
So
but
they're try-
like if someone's trying to describe a human being, it's like, oh, what did they look like? Oh, he was African American. I'm like, what if he wasn't?
Yeah. No. This
What
is
if he
a
was
new thing,
Jamaican
though.
or patient?
This is a new thing, though.
Well, I
because-
will say, Cynthia, because I don't know your ethnicity. If I tried to describe you, I'd probably get in trouble.
She's Oriental.
Oh, hit the button! Hit the button! Hit the
Oh,
button!
that was the quickest I've ever seen somebody canceled.
Hit the button!
I was
Like
waiting.
if I
for an
called you the
excuse.
K word.
I was
Oh
waiting
wow!
Wow.
Okay,
oh, wow,
this is
shots
escalating.
fired.
This is escalating
No.
quickly.
No, what
mean,
I was actually going to say is that like this is an opposite problem of what the way white people used to act, because they've gone in a lot of white people have gone in the other direction now, where they're afraid to like classify non-whites as anything, whereas they used
Right.
to just say like the N-word. And
Listen,
these
I
are the
classify
same-
people.
Right, and it's the same sort of thing where they would used to call people like Asian people Orientals. Like it's
I'm
that
gonna be like, my
Exactly.
friend Cynthia, she's Filipino-esque or Taiwan. No, I'm kidding. I'm really kidding. But you know, I certainly have no choice but to classify people, right?
Mm.
I just say
Sometimes it's just like a descriptor.
right.
You could just be like my friend Cynthia, you know, the really blunt one, you know,
Mm.
The Asian one.
super
Yep.
blunt.
Oh,
Asian is acceptable.
Ish, you got it. You got it out of her. now. Tell us why. Tell us why you were asking her.
Because my understanding is that TikTok was banned because of an Asian culture, right? Like, I guess using it to spy or what have you, and
It's probably
not culture,
specific.
that's just the government.
It's probably specific country, right?
yeah, specific country.
Is
Yeah,
it China. What country is it?
I want to say Korea.
Okay.
That's not a culture. Spying is not a culture of theirs.
Well, you're right, but
I thought it was because of it's a Chinese-owned company.
You're right. We just kind of, and I might have fallen victim to that, but we just kind of like ascribe certain things to culture. At least that's the narrative.
In many cases, nationalists fight against the Chinese government, right?
Yep.
Hong Kong was all about that, and they're still suffering in some ways too. So it's hard to identify a culture with a government, alone with their religion. That's kind of
especially a government that seeks to erase its own past. With like the communists in China.
Horrible things are happening in China right now, like human injustices.
Fires.
Yes,
but that's typical. I mean, come on, guys. I mean, really, typical of communist dictatorships, which is the world round. And I'm not saying that on the right that's a shining bright example of dictatorships. We have that going on in Russia. So I mean, it's just.
Does it really have anything to do with communist dictatorships, or is it typical dictatorships?
It's typical. Like I argue with my father, who fought against the regime in Cuba. I say it's just military dictatorships. Period. That's it.
Sure.
Absolutely. And he makes the distinction because it's a lot personal. It's a lot more personal to him that it was the communists, particularly the association with that term.
Yeah,
but
well,
I can't.
I'm sure all the countries we've bombed. Sorry, I'm sure all the countries we've bombed have said the capitalist. Whatever.
Absolutely. There seems to be no end in history of superpowers going too far.
We bomb a lot of countries for shady reasons. Like, we go into countries, create civil unrest so that we can come into countries and pacify the civil unrest so that we can economically indebt them to us. We do some shady stuff.
It's that book I was recommending to you, Shock Doctrine. That's like
Naomi Klein. I love it.
That's
Naomi
like
Klein.
so on point with everything you're talking about. That's going to talk about Chile and like
South Africa.
Like all the dirty shit we did. I put in the link, by the way, an example of a good show where one of the characters has a penchant for mature people. If you click on the link, you'll see.
Oh boy.
Speaking of people who like mature people, have you ever seen the show of guys who are really into like older women? And there's this clip of a guy. He's probably like around my age. And
is it called the Ish Mavens? Is it called the Ish Mavens show?
It's more of a clip, and then you see them making out like
It's not a clip. It's a if you click on it, you'll see the show. You'll see the pic of the show. You'll see
there's a difference between yesterday's wine and fine aged wine. They're both good, but one you savor,
Look at Ish sharing the lines from his youth. Look at that.
Listen,
I know you already, man. I know you already. I got you.
I was hot for teacher. I'd be like, listen.
Exactly. Someone was staying
really
after class.
Today. Your hair looks really good. They'd be like, oh, you noticed. That was my skill set, right? I'm always going to notice when no one else notices. Like, that's what I'm going to do.
Ish is thoughtful. Ish is thoughtful and a pleasure to have in the classroom.
Yep.
Well, and you still do it now.
Oh yeah.
Teacher wants to see me after school.
You remember the time that we were talking about like the episode we were talking about
it's like breathing. It's involuntary. But go on. I'm sorry.
We were talking about street harassment and I had just colored my hair. and then you were like, "Is it okay if I give you a compliment?"
I noticed that you colored your hair.
Yeah,
Yes.
because you had to bring up that I had colored my hair.
I don't know. Sometimes it's involuntary. It's like a subconscious mechanism through years of, practice makes perfect.
And then he asked you if you wanted some fries.
Oh,
No, I
damn.
didn't. No, I didn't.
Oh no.
That didn't happen.
That did
That
not
didn't
happen.
happen. We did make
What?
fun of that though. Like, hey, you got some fries with that shake? Like, what is it? Like, I could never imagine myself saying something like that to someone. That's when
so
Cynthia was
corny.
asking about the cat calling.
Yeah.
We had a whole conversation about why guys do these like dumb, like
Ugh,
pickup lines,
I fucking hate men.
like stupid pickup lines too. Like, really?
Yeah,
That's what you're going with?
because there's a simple reason for that, Ish. Because guys are dumb.
Yeah.
We're dumb.
Yeah.
They're not just dumb. They're just fucking disgusting pieces.
I
That too.
learned.
That too,
I
Cynthia.
learned my lessons from older women, and I was an astute student.
Like he said, he went for the extra credit.
Yeah, I did.
Yes, you did.
See, I think I've semi-solved the cat calling problem. Dyeing my hair weird colors so that they assume that I'm a lesbian. Takes care of the problem.
That's good. I haven't solved the cat calling problem because nobody does it to me. So I'm trying to figure out how to make it happen.
It's the opposite problem.
Well, you
but I have the
gotta
opposite
show some
problem.
legs, Sam.
I was
You
about
don't
to
get
say
it
you
for
gotta wear
free.
shorter shorts.
I was
about to say you gotta wear shorter shorts.
That's right.
That's
Hey, don't victim blame here. Okay.
Sam, don't-
I was actually advised to do just that by a former NIPERG colleague.
Sam, nobody told you that how you dress is an invitation? Like, no
No.
one told you this?
No, she told me to show more leg. So
Yeah, actually,
it just
this
reminds
guy's victim blaming now as a law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really, though, it's more of a
It's
theory.
one thing to be attracted to someone, it's another to vocalize that.
No,
Yes,